everybody, welcome back to the Vibrant Life Show here in Cloud Dojo. I'm Corey and this is your spot for inspiration on living a healthy, happy, and vibrant life. Today I am sharing my ways that I incorporate being mindful, more present, more aware in each moment into my life as a busy woman, a busy mom in this culture. How do we do it? Let's talk about it. Okay, so there's one way that we might think about mindfulness in the more traditional sense of like Om and chanting and meditation, and I do all that and I find it very useful, and we'll get into that later in the video. But I want to talk about mindfulness in the everyday. I was reading this story recently about a Buddhist nun who left her safe sanctuary of the monastery that she was living in and just moved to the Midwest somewhere and started working at a gas station. I just thought it was a really interesting story she shared of how she wanted to challenge herself in that way, because living sort of separated from the hecticness of our society and having hours every day of quiet and peace and being in community with other people who valued those same things, she loved it and felt like it was this amazing escape, but she wanted to see if she could use those mindfulness skills in the real world. So while I've never lived in an abbey, I did in my 20s have lots of meditation retreats and just so much time I definitely took for granted of peace and quiet. And then I became a mom, I started more of my career, and things changed. So I want to talk about how I still incorporate a lot of those mindfulness principles to bring more peace and calm into my day-to-day routines. So first up, we're talking about those seasons of life when you feel like I will never have a moment's peace. Like, for example, when you have a kiddo that's maybe 3 and under, my friend calls it the mamastery instead of the monastery, because it's a whole different kind of training where you're really, forging yourself through fire the whole 3 years. Really, if you also count pregnancy, that's kind of wild too. And I remember the moment when I realized I cannot just go meditate, like especially when they're crawling and then crawling all over you and walking and running off to do other things, and sitting still in meditation, often just not an option. So I would find moments that I would start a routine of I'm going to be as mindful as I can during these moments in my day, and this is going to be my new kind of meditation in this monastery. So one of those for me was when I was feeding my kids, when I was like breastfeeding or even sitting at the table feeding them when they were a little bit older. And I would just begin with a mindful breath. And then, like when I was breastfeeding, I would actually go through some meditations in my mind. That's such a time where I wanted to have, you're so burnt out, right? I wanted to just scroll or read something or watch something, but instead I used that time, at least the first 5 or 10 minutes, to just breathe, bring awareness to the present moment, do a body scan, notice my breaths getting longer and deeper. And I will tell you that was really incredibly important for me. So I definitely didn't do it every single time I breastfed, but at least once or twice a day, I would have that be my meditation time. And then it gets a little harder and they're crawling around, they're toddlers, and it's not just this like calm time where they're just sitting there or lying there, but they're sitting at the table and you're having to feed them and they're wanting to leave. So, but I just kind of kept that mealtime as my time, no matter what craziness is happening. I'm just going to try to bring awareness to it. All right, so my second one, as crazy as this might sound, was in the car. It sounds crazy because obviously we're supposed to be very present and aware when we're driving. But it was just that once I got in the car with, buckling the kids in and making sure everybody was okay and they're in their car seat and they don't want to be, or they wanted a snack, or all the things, and then I've got to figure out where I'm going and I've got to drive there. And the kids might want to be talking to me as they get older, as we're driving. So it was just this time that felt a little hectic as a mom when you're in the car with littles. And so that was another cue for me to remember as soon as I started that car, take a deep breath and then try to be very mindful on the drive, not only for safety, but just also because it can feel so stressful in those moments driving our kids around. And so I remembered to just notice my breaths, be very aware of the space around me, try to minimize distractions as much as I could, and just be present in the moment of that car ride. And then the third one, this sounds crazy, but when they started to have a temper tantrum, or like if I had a little baby and she was just screaming and crying and I tried everything. I don't know if you can relate, and nothing worked and she's still crying. So in those moments, I would just look at my baby and I would just be like, okay, I surrender to this present moment. And I would just take several deep breaths. And often I would have an aha moment. I would have a moment of like, oh, maybe I should try this other thing that it just hadn't occurred to me in my stressed out state. So that was another one that I used also when they were toddlers and older, and if they were having a meltdown, I would take the first few moments not to react as much as I wanted to like help them or ask what's wrong or try to figure it out or whatever. I would just breathe for a couple moments and like observe them. Like I used to observe the wall at the Zen temple, just like, oh, there's some grain in that wood and look at that. And okay, I'm just noticing this moment. I would just stop and look at my child like, what are you? What's happening right now? How is this scene unfolding before me? So sometimes just that would help them kind of reorient depending on the moment. But it's certainly helped me to have a better response. So those were 3 ways that I always reminded myself to bring some awareness to the present moment, even when I was going through the hustle and bustle of new mom life. And that can be for whatever. If you're in a season where your job is really hectic, maybe just pick 1 or 2 or 3 little cues in your day to like remind you to come back and bring awareness to the present moment. All right, so my 4th way that I incorporate mindfulness into my day-to-day life is connecting with nature. It's funny that we even have a word for nature these days. I'm sure, before people were living in houses and everything, they really didn't talk about like, oh, let's go out in nature. It was just natural. It was part of your everyday life. It's just where we belong as people, as much as we can be outside, connecting with nature, windows open, doors open, even if we're inside. And the funny thing is, I've been such a homebody, really. Like when I was growing up, we had a lot of beautiful nature around us, but we were pretty like bookish people, and we stayed inside and played card games and read books and all those things and watched TV. So it's been a really big journey, I would say, since I was a teenager, of reconnecting with nature. For me, that's hand in hand with mindfulness. It's coming back to what I'm really about, which is, we come from nature. We are natural beings. And so as soon as I get outside and as soon as I get my kids outside, everybody regulates. All right, my 5th way that I incorporate mindfulness into my day-to-day life is at transitions. So even though things are a lot more calm now that my kids are a little bit older, I still really try to incorporate mindfulness throughout the day. So the way I do it now is at transitions. I try to, and this is something my dad, who's so not a like meditator in any sense, but he actually is. He just wouldn't call it that. But he said, you know what, whenever you're about to transition from one thing to another, just take a few moments, breathe deeply, check in with yourself, and just before you rush on, notice this moment. So to me, that is one of the most important keys of mindfulness, is not just rushing from thing to thing, but right after I drop the kids off from school, stop, sit in my car, take a few breaths, and then before I get out to my next thing, stop, take a couple breaths, take stock of myself, take stock of this moment, and on throughout my day. It can be 10 seconds each time, 30 seconds each time, or more. but having those little moments of stopping before I rush on to the next thing is key. All right, number 6 is sort of similar to the first one, but it's as my emotions start to transition, I try to catch them and bring a mindful moment to that. This one, of course, takes so much practice. For, I would say, a few years, I had the intention to do this, and what would end up happening is I would just change emotional states, like getting upset or something, and then afterwards I'd be like, oh, I'm aware that I got upset without stopping myself. So it wasn't quite what I was intending to do, but at least I had awareness. It was just a little bit later. I have gotten a lot better at actually stopping when I start to feel upset and taking a breath and bringing awareness to what is starting my blood to boil. What is the thing that's causing this change in emotional state? And what thoughts am I associating with this moment right now? What stories am I telling myself about why that person did this? And what could happen if this thing that I'm worried about happening? There's usually a lot of layers underneath our first emotional reaction. And so nowadays I try to stop myself and breathe. I love Thich Nhat Hanh is definitely one of my mindfulness inspirations. And I just love how almost anything people would ask him in interviews, his answer would be like, okay, well, the way that you handle that situation, that divorce you're going through, that, death of a loved one, that scary transition to a new job, he's like, okay, all right, so that thing, first you breathe. So no matter what it is, you come home to the body, come home to the rhythm of the body, which is the breath, and then take stock. All right, number 7 is bringing mindfulness to the start of the day and the end of the day. Even when I had that hectic season of life with little people, and I couldn't really find time to meditate, I could find just the moment that I opened my eyes, or actually right before I opened my eyes, when I woke up, I would kind of cover my eyes and I would just say a little gratitude prayer and take a moment to just check in with my body and notice at least one deep breath. And then sometimes that was it. Like sometimes it was because someone was crying, and so I was like, thank you for this day. Here we go. Just that little moment. And then falling asleep, exhausted, dead tired. Oh my gosh. But right before I fall asleep, I tried, even back when I only had a little moment, to just thank you for this day, breath, notice body, fall to sleep. These days, I have more time, so I've been taking that little moment. The fact that I had that little moment has actually been so helpful in expanding it to a full-on morning meditation and evening meditation. Like if I just would wake up and I didn't have any 5-second period of awareness, it would have been a lot harder to incorporate any new routine into my morning or my evening. But because I had a point where I stopped and I had awareness and I did a little routine every day that was literally 5 seconds long a lot of times, nowadays that has turned into a 10-minute meditation, or sometimes 15-20-minute meditation, and then the same in the evening. So now I use either my app Insight Timer, which I just love so much. It's simply just a timer on your phone that keeps track of your meditation with some beautiful music and bells or whatever. You can have silence and just bells. Or they also have guided meditations from a bunch of really great meditation leaders from around the world. So that's really neat. Or I just use my trusty bell. Either way, I just get in some time where I'm really sitting there and I'm noticing my body in a more profound way. And actually I started out 1 minute of peace and quiet. I'm too nervous to try to set a 5-minute timer, but I'm just gonna take 1 minute, and then I would slowly build it up. But anytime you have free of distraction is so incredibly important to those times that you need to bring in mindfulness during a distracted, hectic moment. One time, this really bad accident happened in our family, and I didn't know if a family member was alive or dead. They were rushed to the hospital, and we didn't know what was happening. And in that moment, my history of meditation just came to me. All those tools, even though I was flooded with emotion, kind of like wrapped around me, and I was able to get in this centered place of just follow the breath. Like I was being held by the strength of what I had laid before me in terms of my meditation practice, and it came in and helped me in that moment to be present and get through this terrible time of waiting to find out. And we found out they lived, and I then broke down in tears and let all the things flow through me. But in that moment, I needed my mindfulness practice, and I'm so thankful that it came to me. So those periods, just like the nun in the monastery, that when she left into the real world, to the hectic world, we'll say, that experience really helped her to be present in all these other moments. So I do think it is really important when we can to practice meditation, real, just basically sitting in silence. Guided meditations, I think, are very important and a great way to start, but also having some time of just sitting, just breathing, just noticing the present moment. When the thoughts come in, being aware that's a thought, and then just letting it pass. All that good practice is really, really important to when we need the mindfulness in our everyday lives. So I think those are all of the tips that I have on how I incorporate mindfulness into my everyday life. I would love to hear from you in the comments below, any other tips that you have. I hope you found some inspiration in all this. Thank you so much for watching. Here's wishing you a healthy, happy, and vibrant week ahead, and I'll see you next time in Cloud Dojo. Bye.